Great, well, let's get started. It's really nice to welcome you to this evening's session, which is an introduction to financial planning. So at Balanced Wealth Planning, we are very proud to be supporting Financial Planning Week for another year. So if you've joined us as part of that initiative and you've seen some of the material that's been advertised, you're really very welcome, and I hope that you find it useful as well. So let's get started. I'm Rebecca Aldridge, and I'm your host for today's webinar, the Introduction to Financial Planning. We'll be covering what it means, whether it's valuable to you, and there'll be some tips to take away. I really hope so anyway. You can ask questions all the way through. There's a Q&A box on your screen, so you can just put any questions in that, and I'll answer them at the end. If you prefer me to answer privately, just say so in your message, and I'll do that by email afterwards. So we're going to be going through all these things today. We're going to share with you the way that I approach financial planning for my clients, and you might be surprised to know that we're actually not going to be talking about things like investment returns, growth rates, or anything remotely technical. That's not what it's about. In fact, we're not going to talk about money at all until we're probably halfway through this. I'm going to take you through the 6 key steps that we use as financial planners. I'll also then give you some tips on what to look for in a professional financial planner if you're looking to use one, and I'll be giving you a handful of actions to start working on straight away. Because we're supporting Financial Planning Week, you can always book a session with me or one of my financial planners within the Balance team for a free chat. We're here to help you kind of test the water and find out whether financial planning is going to help you. So let's start by thinking about what financial planning means. So this is how I describe it. Financial planning is an ongoing process to help you make sensible decisions about money and give you the best chance of achieving your goals in life. Just note the 3 sections that we've highlighted. It's ongoing. It's about making financial decisions and about having the end in mind. So we're going to start by exploring that more now. So to use an analogy, life is like a really long journey, but a really great journey with plenty of fun, interest and fulfillment and purpose isn't going to happen by accident. You're going to need to know where you want to go, and you don't want to miss anything on your journey. You're going to need equipment, supplies, resources, and you're going to need them to last for the whole journey without you worrying as you get close to the end that you're going to have to start using less. You're going to start to need to do some planning. So when we think about life and financial planning, we can think about money being a resource for your life's journey. And you need to have a plan that's continually being refined and revisited to help you make sensible decisions about you and your money, because you want to have the best chance of achieving those goals for your journey, whatever they might be. So there are 6 key steps in a good financial planning process. And the first step we take when thinking about financial planning is actually nothing to do with money. It's all about you. And while it's forward-looking to see where you're headed, it's important also to look back at where you've come from and where you are today. Your past decision-making around money and experiences shape where you are today, and they have an impact, good or bad, on where you'll end up in the future. So it's important to think back first, then start looking forward. Looking forward is all about your vision and your goals for the future. Just take a look at the questions on the screen and think about your answers. You can't answer them right now in just a few minutes. It's going to take some time and some time to reflect. this isn't a quiz. It's all about your life and thinking about how you want to make the most of every day. Which of those questions resonate with you most? Sometimes it can be quite difficult to work out your answers to these sorts of questions. After all, it's not the kind of thing we get asked every day. So I've actually given you two different sets of questions to look at. And whether you do this now, or maybe this evening when you're sitting over a glass of wine with your partner or a family member, I suggest you work through them together. So here's one set of questions. I'll move on to the second set of questions as an alternative. So these three questions I use quite regularly as part of my exploratory work with my clients. So to summarise, question one asks you to imagine that you are financially secure. You have all the money you need. Don't worry about how that's happened or why. Just imagine that that's the case. How would you live your life? Would you change anything? What would you do? You can think about this as being a little bit like a lottery winning scenario, and you might have had conversations with friends already about what you might do if that happened to you. So take a moment now to think about the first things that pop into your mind when you read the question. Maybe even make a note of them. In the second question, we're told that your doctor breaks some bad news to you, that you have only 5 to 10 years left to live. It will happen suddenly, and you'll feel perfectly healthy until the moment you go. So you walk out of the doctor's surgery, you take a deep breath, and think about what you will do in the time you have ahead of you. What changes are you going to make? You're back in your normal financial situation here, so what would change, if anything, for you? In the third question, we're told that you visit your doctor this week and are told that you actually just have one day left to live. Now, this isn't a morbid question. It's not being asked to make you feel sad, but just imagine you leave the surgery this time and take another deep breath and reflect on where you are today, on all of your accomplishments and all of the things you haven't yet done. And you ask yourself, what did I miss? Who did I not get to be? And what did I not get to do? That might be something for you that is very deeply rich and complex. It may be something as simplistic as getting your garden redesigned or getting a flash car that you always promised yourself. There's no right or wrong answers to these questions. So your first tool as part of a financial planning exercise and to learn about it is to ask yourself these questions, or the ones on the previous page if you prefer. And whether you pursue creating your own financial plan or whether you work with a professional, I think most people find these questions really thought-provoking, and they can often lead to some significant changes too. So having established from these questions what's important to you and what your goals are, we now need to think about step 2, which is what money you have to be able to support those goals, because the vast majority of things we need in life require money. And I'm not talking about buying shiny things, but paying for comfort, security, and experiences. This is the sort of information you'll need to know to work out whether you have enough. And of course, a professional does this all the time. You need to know what you have, what you owe, what you earn, and what you spend. I suggest, if you're having a crack at this yourself, making a list of everything in those categories, and also thinking about whether they're going to change in the future, whether that's something that's under your control or not. For example, you might spend a certain amount now, but is it going to increase if you're about to have children going to university or leave university? Will your bills decrease if you're planning to move to another part of the country? Might your income change if you get a new job? What about if you have your own business and are expecting a few difficult years? Income and spending could be quite variable. We can provide you with some forms to help you with this if you're getting stuck. If you work with a professional financial planner, they will need to know this information to be able to properly help you and talk about what the future might hold. So what we're trying to find out from all this information that you've gathered about what you have, what you owe, what you have coming in and coming out, is whether there's enough to be able to meet all of the goals on your wish list. If we use another analogy, imagine that all of your spendable wealth goes into a bucket. You put your salary in there every month, maybe an inheritance you receive, maybe that lottery win. Whenever you come into some money, it goes in there. But at the bottom of your bucket, there are taps representing your spending. Sometimes more goes in than goes out, and the water level rises. When you stop working completely, there's nothing much going in, and the taps on the bottom are still flowing, so that water level can start to come down. Our role as professional financial planners is to make sure that our clients don't run out of money, that that water level never gets right to the bottom of the bucket, but also that our clients aren't so careful that it keeps building up and up and up. An empty bucket is a real problem, but actually an overflowing bucket isn't a success story either. It usually means that you have held back in some way and you might have missed out on experiences when you've had the chance. This really often comes up when we're thinking about people moving into retirement, where they have an opportunity to have really some fantastic experiences, perhaps in the first 10, 15, 20 years of their retirement, but they're not going to be able to do very much more at the end of their lives. So there needs to be some good balance there. So what do you think? You think about your situation. Do you think you have enough wealth to achieve everything that you identified at that first stage when we were looking at your dreams and your goals for the future? What do you think? You might feel that you're able to do everything that's important to you today, but how does that change over the coming years? If there's not enough, where is there room for something to change? Is there a dream you're willing to let go? Or would you be prepared to make a compromise? For example, if you want to stop working at 55 and buy a holiday home in Italy, and there's simply not enough money in the pot to be able to do that, something needs to shift. Do you carry on working for another 5 years and then buy the Italian place? Or do you stop working at 55 and give up on the Italian dream? Equally, if you're very confident that you can already do everything that you like and more, go back to the answers you gave at stage 1. Is there anything more you'd like to be doing? People or causes you'd particularly like to help that would give you a sense of fulfillment and purpose? Don't hold back. So professionals use cash flow forecasting tools, and understanding the shape of your wealth over the very long term can be quite complicated to calculate unless you're using these types of specialist tools. It's not impossible to do it very roughly on your own, but it's a lot more difficult. So I want to show you an example and introduce you to Stella. She's a fictitious lady. She's 50 and she's keen to make a few changes in her life since she got divorced. She looks pretty happy about it. She's been to see her financial planner and they've gone through all of her finances, what she earns, what she spends, and the kind of lifestyle she'd like to be living. She wants a good, steady income and she's keen to buy a new house and then start going on some more interesting holidays. Now she's free from that boring partner. Now, let's take a look at her plan and we'll be able to see what a forecast of somebody's wealth looks like. So we're currently looking at a chart which shows Stella's spendable wealth for each year of her life. The timeline at the bottom shows her age between now and age 94. The other upright axis shows her liquid spendable wealth. Green is pension money and pink is cash. And you can see it growing over time, each column showing each year's worth of wealth. This particular forecast is based on Stella buying that house that she had her eye on, with a small mortgage, going on the holidays, and working until age 65. But this chart doesn't actually show her value in any of these columns because she can't spend it unless she were to sell it and perhaps downsize later, which she doesn't want to do. This shows that her wealth is actually growing over the lifetime while she's working and then staying fairly steady throughout retirement. In short, she's got enough to do everything she hasn't. So Stella then mentions that actually she would love to do one or two other big once-in-a-lifetime trips, if that were possible. In the next few years, she'd love to go on a safari, visit the Taj Mahal and visit some of the top golf courses worldwide. She thinks that might cost perhaps £10,000 a year to do it really well, and she'd like to give £50,000 to her son to help him buy a house. And if possible, she'd really like to retire sooner than 65 if she could. Through a series of simulations, we find out that she actually can't quite do all of that. This forecast shows that her wealth rapidly runs out if she does everything that she just listed and that she stops working at 60 rather than 65. Her pension money's run out by the time she's 80. It's just not sustainable. But we look at some alternatives. We see that she could work full-time to 60 as planned and then part-time between 60 and 65. That feels like a reasonable compromise and it gives us a much better picture. There are other ways of achieving this same result too. She could spend less, she could buy a smaller home, and so on. Each one of the variables will change the shape of her plan. Knowing what's possible gives Stella the confidence to find a house in that budget. Oh, that's exciting. She knows that if she gives up the trips or buys a more modest house, she can afford to retire sooner. But actually, she enjoys work and is happy continuing if it means that she can travel the world and have a more robust plan. Well, there's an exciting moment in the middle of that. I hope that made sense, looking at the forecast of Stella's wealth. Let's move to step 4 of the financial plan. So this is where it starts to get a lot more tricky. And there's no doubt that the greater the level of your wealth, the easier it is to make costly mistakes, and the more a professional with expertise can add real value. At this stage, you're creating the technical side of your financial plan. Now, there's no right or wrong way of approaching this, but here are some of the areas that we would look at as professional financial planners. So firstly, in a plan, I'd be looking at where you can reduce unnecessary costs. The most substantial costs to be saved will probably be those that you know least about, and they'll be the ones that you pay out of your pension and investment pots and also against your mortgage. You might not even be aware that pension and investment pots carry a cost, but they do. So typically you find charges of around 1% of the value a year. It doesn't sound like a lot, but start thinking about that on a yearly basis coming out of your savings pot. That is high, but it's quite common. When you think about the fact that investment returns might be perhaps 5% a year on that money you're saving and investing, do you really want to be giving away 1% of that? Very good investment portfolios and pension plans can be found for more like 0.5% a year. So it sounds like small numbers, but believe me, they're not when they're applied to your growing investments for the future and they're charged every single year. It can make a really tangible difference. Similarly, with things like mortgage costs and credit cards, think about whether you have the ability to reduce that debt or the cost of any debt. Can you change your mortgage product? Are there better deals? Can you switch your credit card, for example? Part of many people's financial plans also include making things simpler. So the question is, can you bring old stuff together, like pension pots, often from previous employers? Can you close some old savings accounts and so on? Sometimes it doesn't make any financial difference, but it surely makes you feel a lot better that you're in control. Where things start to get a bit more tricky is thinking about how to reduce tax. And actually, thinking about tax and reducing taxes is one of the core parts that's usually integral to a financial plan because it makes such a big difference. That's where really substantial savings can usually be made that can make a very big difference short and long term. It's fair to say that if you don't have very much, the savings will be small. But if you have more substantial wealth and it's growing, the savings can be really quite significant. You'll probably be familiar with the amounts you can pay into an ISA and some rough idea about what you're allowed to pay into a pension. But that's really just the beginning. The more you earn and the more wealth you have, the more difficult it is to avoid tax without not really knowing what you're doing. So I'd always recommend taking professional advice if you know you're right at the top of your pension allowances, for example, or if you think that your estate, the money that you own, would be subject to inheritance tax if you pass away and you want to try and reduce that. That can be quite complicated. Also, if you're thinking of planning for a big change like retirement, where you're making decisions that cannot be undone often, it's really important to think about those decisions really carefully from a tax point of view. They can often be structured better than you first think. And again, that's where a professional often can bring something to the table that's just not part of what you're familiar with. As part of your plan, you should also think about whether you can improve the returns you have on your investments and pensions while taking a sensible amount of risk. And by returns, I really just mean the amount it grows by. It's also really important not to overlook stress testing your plan. And this is something that most people forget about. Think about what would happen if you lost your job, for example, or if mortgage rates increased, if you were too unwell to work, or even if your partner or children were unwell and you needed to care for them. Developing a contingency plan for these possibilities is essential because for all of us, having security is incredibly important. And the idea of suddenly not having enough money is a really terrifying one. It's essential that is part of your planning as well. There are lots of things you can probably quite comfortably do yourself, but I'll emphasize again that for more complicated planning, it really is a good idea to speak to a professional because mistakes can be made easily if you don't know what you're doing. They can rarely be undone and they can be extremely costly. So as we've already agreed, if you don't have enough money, you will be less able to do all the things you want to in life. And that's not where we want to be. We want you to be boosting your wealth and feeling really comfortable that you've got enough, that you're making the most of it, and that if your plan is suddenly rocked and has to change, that you're going to be all right as well. So the next step is to make some of this stuff happen. So far, we've just thought about what you want to do, worked out what you have, and worked out in theory if there's enough. Well, that's all very well, but there's going to be some actions here. So having put together the framework, you need to make it happen. It sounds simple, But I know what often happens is that all the effort is put into analysing what you have and your budget and where it all goes. And then it all gets a bit difficult. You agree to pick it up again next week or the week after, and it goes down the list of your priorities and it never happens. So my advice would be to have a plan that you can apply step by step. Not everything needs to be done on day one. Even budgeting, for example, just start with a rough budget and then hone it later. Just do everything gently and at a high level to start with, so that you've got some sort of plan and a few actions. You can always make it better as a second go. Part of that, I would suggest, part of the planning and keeping on top of your actions would be to have a chat about your plan with your partner or a friend, somebody that's in this with you once a month for the first few months, so that it doesn't drift and all the actions actually get dealt with. So again, that's why a professional often is helpful, because we physically make stuff happen often for our clients. We'll do a lot of things for you, but also for those actions that you need to do, we are there on the side saying, have you done that yet? What's the reason why that hasn't happened? Is there an obstacle, a problem, some questions? Let's go back over that and see why that hasn't happened. So having applied your financial plan, perhaps this might take a few days, maybe even a few weeks or months to do that for you. Having got it sorted and put all your actions into place, you can just sit back and relax, right? Well, sort of. Actually, I recommend reviewing the whole plan at least once a year. Why? Because things change. You get a pay rise. Your costs go up. You have a baby. You decide to move house. You receive an inheritance. Anything can happen to your circumstances. And things from external point of view can change too. So investment markets might change significantly like they have this year. Perhaps the budget brings some changes to tax allowances or rules that you'd previously been relying on, and something needs to change. Things change, and you know what? They keep changing. And each time anything substantial changes, you really need to go back and to review what you said in your plan. I can bet you every time you do that, there'll be something that you feel you need to tweak. So I want to talk briefly about finding a professional financial planner. I've taken you through those 6 steps, which I think will be helpful. And I've mentioned a few times that for many people it makes sense to work with a professional planner. Now, this isn't an advert for us, it's not a sales pitch, but what you have here is a list of all the things that I think are particularly important to have in a financial planner. And I want to emphasize something that's really important. And if you only take away one thing from this session, I would like it to be this. There are very many people who describe themselves as financial planners, but they actually do very different things from one another. I'm sorry, that's the way that, unfortunately, the profession has found itself in. I suppose it's rather like you could describe yourself as a medical doctor, but you could actually have a very different set of skills. If you're a surgeon, a GP, or a therapist, people would come to you for different things and you'd have a different approach. The vast majority of financial planners, also called financial advisors, will fix specific problems, but they will generally not look at the whole picture. Most financial planners don't use those wealth forecasting tools like we looked at earlier, for example. Many of them prefer to use expensive investment portfolios. Some of them, in fact, many of them are restricted in some way as to what they can do for you. Typically, you find that they have a limited range of investments that they want to recommend to you, and they'll usually not be prepared to entertain giving you advice about tax, despite the fact it makes such an enormous difference to you. It's also fairly unusual for them to look at your lifetime position and to think about how you can protect yourself if things go wrong. Now, I'm not saying everybody's like that. They're not. There's loads of really great financial planners who, like us, work holistically. But it's really important you know that there are these different flavours so that you can choose something that fits you. You might want a quick fix. The majority of people want and benefit from a holistic approach, but that's not right for everyone. It's also useful, I think, to understand how financial planners charge. So pretty much every financial planning company in the country charges a percentage of money that they manage for you. So if you have £50,000 or £100,000 or £1 million, they will charge a percentage, normally between 1 and 3% initially, to recommend what you do with that, and then something like 0.5% or 1% a year on an ongoing basis. We don't do that, and there's a growing number of progressive financial planners that charge in a different way. I think that approach would mean that we would be conflicted in how we could advise you and would be somewhat unethical. That's my personal view. We charge flat fees instead, which are based on the complexity of your circumstances. So the more complicated your situation is, the more time and expertise you need and the higher the flat cost. It doesn't actually matter how much wealth you have. If we go back to the long journey analogy, I'd suggest that you look for somebody who can advise you about your whole position. It works much better for the majority of people, but of course, you know your circumstances best. So you've got some actions from today. We've looked at what financial planning is, and we've gone through those 6 financial planning steps. And we've also touched on what you should be looking for in a professional planner if you work with one. You've got lots of questions there to help you start thinking about what you want to be doing for the next few years of your life too. So I'd like to suggest that your actions from today would be to start working through those 6 financial planning steps, starting with step 1, discovering your vision and your goals. If this isn't your cup of tea and you really want to have somebody to be with you on this journey, then obviously work with a professional financial planner. If you think you'd like to give things a go yourself, well then you go for it and see how far you can get. You might get to a point where you think, I'm kind of stuck now and I need a professional to take over now. I also want to remind you that we offer free consultancy sessions via video calls to talk about how financial planning can help you. And we'll be quite straightforward if you say, if you explain your circumstances and we don't think that there's anything that we or another firm could do to help you, we can signpost you in the right direction. But if there's something we think really that you'd benefit from, we will say so and explain what the cost would be. You can book meetings with me or any of my team via the meeting booking button on our website. And there are some details on this slide as well. So I thought what would be helpful is if you are thinking of working with a financial planner, whether that's someone within the balance team or somebody else, I would recommend asking these 10 powerful questions to help you understand whether they're right for you. These are questions that you don't find normally listed on the website when you're looking at ideas of what to ask a financial planner. I think these are important. So they're my top tips if you're contacting them. So you have some of our details here, and these slides are going to be emailed out to you after this session so that you can contact us if you need to. And that just brings us to asking if you have any questions that you'd like to raise. And I'm just going to have a look now to see whether we've got any questions coming in. So let's answer the question, how long does it normally take to have professional financial planning advice from the moment you get in touch to the moment your plan is put together? Is this something that takes a few days, a few weeks or more? Well, the answer to that is that generally when somebody meets us for the first time, that's on a free basis, and we're just sort of getting to know each other and working out whether there's a need for planning and what kind of planning you might need. After that, we generally ask you for lots of information about your circumstances, And we also ask you for permission so that we can write to or email the companies that you might have funds with. So if you have pensions, for example, we'd usually want to contact those pension companies so that we can find out exactly what you have, exactly what the costs are, the way that it's performing with investments and so on. So that actually is the longest part of the process, because those companies tend to take anything from 2 or 3 weeks up to 6 weeks to reply to those questions. Once we have that information, it generally takes us a week or two to go through everything, put all your information into our forecasting tools to simulate different scenarios, and just test things out and ready to go through with you. So you can expect that part of the process can take maybe a month at the least amount of time, and anything up to 2 months if you've got some uncooperative companies to work with in there. At that point, we go through your plan with you. We go through the forecasting that I showed you for Stella earlier, and we give you a specific set of actions. Many of those actions are things that we can do for you, but some of them will be things that we recommend you do for yourself, like maybe closing a couple of bank accounts, or putting in place a new will, or lasting power of attorney legal document, perhaps. That is the start of your plan being presented to you, and then it might take a couple of weeks for the actions to be dealt with from there, or depending on the number of actions and how complex they are, it might take a few months. Everybody's circumstances are different. I hope that answers that question. Let me see if there are any others. Okay, so is it important to work with a chartered financial planner, or will an ordinary financial planner do? It's a good question, because chartered financial planners are, it's a recognised qualification. It means that they're going to be extremely well qualified as individuals, and if the company is chartered also, it means that that company has a large number of chartered financial planners within their team. So it's a good indicator that the company is investing in their team, that they're knowledgeable, and that they have a good, sensible approach. There's no guarantee that you're going to like the people any more or less than somebody who is not chartered, of course. So it's just one of the factors that you might use when you're deciding what sort of company to work with, I should say. Okay, and one more question. If you're working with a professional planner, do you just have the plan at the beginning and then you're on your own, or do you have an ongoing relationship with them? And the answer is that it's common, in fact, it's normal for somebody to have a plan put together and then to have an ongoing planning relationship. And the reason for that is because, well, life changes and your plan is going to change. And if your circumstances are anything like complicated, then you're going to want to have somebody on hand to quickly check in with to see what you need to do. And you also want to have a professional that will actually proactively contact you and say, this has happened, we need to make a change, or there's been a new announcement, we need to do such and such. So to proactively change things for you, and to respond to things like your company year end if you're a business owner, or your tax year end, to make sure that you do things in the right time. But it's not compulsory to have an ongoing financial planning service. Many people just need to have a plan to set them on the right track, and then they feel quite able to look after things from there, and they'll maybe check in again, several years later when things have got more complicated again. There is one more question. Does financial planning include making investment recommendations? Do we recommend investments and pensions? The answer is that yes. We certainly do recommend different types of pensions and investments. We can recommend who they're with, what the underlying investment funds are, what risk level to take, look at the historical performance, measure that performance against sensible benchmarks, and so on. So yes, that's all part and parcel of a good financial plan, is having your money invested in a way that it's going to grow and not to take too much risk for you either. Okay, I'm going to close the questions now then. So I hope you've enjoyed that session. I hope it's given you some food for thought. It might be something that you have thought long and hard about in the past, or it might be something that's completely new for you. Hopefully, I mean, I really want to give the last message that financial planners are, most of us are here to listen and here to help. You know, we want you to have the most comfortable and meaningful life that you can, and manipulating your money so that it's in the right place at the right time is just part of that journey. Great, I hope that's been helpful, and I wish you a very relaxing evening.